of Ethereum staking. Before I start, does anyone engage in mining activity? Yeah, one person. Anyone do proof of stake, engage with staking? Quite a few. That's cool. That's cool. Okay. So this talk is basically for people who maybe don't stake and they wanted to. I've talked to a lot of people who are interested. Or maybe you stake and you're looking at other ways of staking, or you're just interested in the mechanics in general. You don't want to stake particularly, but you're just intellectually curious. So I'll just go over a quick overview. So I'll be talking about quick background of proof of work and proof of stake. Why would someone want to stake in the first place? Some common misconceptions that I hear all the time. Staking details and practicalities. Staking options, so there's different ways you can stake and be a staker. And monitoring, so if you're staking, you want to make sure that you keep on staking and you don't do anything incorrectly. And best practices. Okay, so I'll start with a definition: distributed consensus. It's an agreement reached among nodes in an open network, even when there are faulty actors. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, these are decentralized networks. Anyone can join, anyone can engage in the consensus mechanism, even when there are faulty actors, which might be malicious, or they might just be faulty and might not be working in accordance with the network. So Bitcoin brought about proof of work. The process of proof of work is you buy some hardware to mine, you race other miners to find the target hash, and then you're rewarded for finding the next block with some Bitcoin, very simple, or whatever currency is on the blockchain that you're mining. With proof of stake, at the very low level, at the protocol level, you acquire some ETH. You send ETH to a smart contract, it's called the deposit contract. You run a validator node, a computer to carry out the tasks, and then you're rewarded for for the node doing the duties well, or penalized for not doing them so well. So you're rewarded or penalized, which is a little bit different from when Ethereum was proof of work. You just get rewarded for doing things well. So this creates strong incentives to do things well. So what are the benefits of staking for the individual? Why would you want to stake? You receive a passive income. If you hold an ETH, for example, and you're optimistic about its valuation in the long run, you might want to stake it while you're holding it to receive sort of a low-risk passive income. You receive predictable returns. So instead of going and trading somewhere and doing something quite risky, you can stake, and it's quite predictable and quite low risk because it's engaging with the Ethereum protocol directly. That's one way of staking, and I'll get into that. It's sustainable. So if you're staking and you're running a computer that's engaging with the Ethereum blockchain, you can set up the computer and it should be able to support staking for many years to come. Unlike with proof of work, maybe there'd be new hardware that you'd have to upgrade, maybe electricity gets more expensive, so maybe it was a bit uncertain into long-term income potential. And then increased network security. So if you hold an ETH, you're using the Ethereum blockchain, why not secure it while you're not using the ETH, while you're just saving it, I guess. And you join a great, friendly, knowledgeable community. So if you're interested in staking, there's a great community called the ETH Staker community on Discord, on Reddit, and they're very welcoming. They'll answer any questions you have, no matter how stupid or no matter how complicated. There are plenty of experts on there. And you have complete control over your investment. So a bit like not your keys, not your coins. If you have control over the keys for the staking validator, you have complete control over that. You can withdraw at any time. You're not relying on some centralized third party, depending on how you stake. But at the very end of the spectrum, in terms of sovereignty, you can have complete control over it. And then there's sort of a scale with other types of staking, which I'll get into. Okay, so some common misconceptions first. Staking is only for technical experts. So this might have been true maybe a couple of years ago, but there's plenty of software now, the ecosystem's grown out. There are plenty of people to help you. So it's quite technical, but if you've got the ETH and you've got the willpower and you want to learn about it, you can set up a node and you don't have to be technical, and you can run it pretty badly and still be successful. Stakers have voting rights. Stakers don't have voting rights. Okay, I hear this one all the time, and therefore Ethereum's not plutocratic. If you have a validator, if you have many validators and lots of ETH staking, you don't get votes on the future functionality of Ethereum. That's important because I hear that quite a lot. Validators have to be online all the time. This is not true. So I speak to some people and they say, "Oh, I'm thinking about staking, but I'm not a DevOps expert, which is someone who's good at setting up infrastructure." You can actually have a validator online 50% of the time and still come out net positive. And there's a mechanism called slashing, which punishes you for your validator doing something quite destructive on the network. And people are really scared of getting slashed. You don't get slashed if your machine goes off. You get slashed in very rare circumstances. One example is when people try to be clever and they set up redundancy for their staking operation, and accidentally they're double voting and they get kicked off the network. So only 229 validators out of 500,000 have been slashed, so pretty rare. Okay, so some key components, sort of definitions around the staking setup, which I'll quickly go over. So there's a node operator. That's someone, a human being, who makes sure that the client software is running properly. So upgrades, notifications from the client developers, making sure things are running well. A validator. So this is a virtual entity that lives on Ethereum. This is basically a representation of a commitment someone's made to run a computer that does a job. So that's represented as a validator in Ethereum, and that's publicly, the success of a validator is public knowledge. So you can see all the validators on the network, how well they're doing. And then the validator client. So as a node operator, you run a validator client, and that works on behalf of the validator. It's got some private keys, and it uses the private keys to make votes and attestations on the state of the network. And hopefully it does those well and get rewarded. Okay, so let's jump more into what a validator is. So it's this virtual construct on the Ethereum network. How do you go about creating a validator and engaging? So I know some of you are probably thinking 32 ETH is quite a lot. It used to not be that much. But this is operating on the base protocol level. I'll be talking more about other ways of staking where you can stake with less ETH. So I know a few of you are probably thinking that. But we start off at the top left. That's basically generation of 24-word seed phrase, a bit like when you're setting up a wallet. Use a bit of software to do this, and it spits out a validator key. This is the key that the validator client or computer uses to do voting on the network. And then you get some deposit data. This is a little file that you use and you upload to, one method is uploading it to the website, the Ethereum Launchpad, and then you send it via a transaction with your 32 ETH, and then it becomes deposited, and then a bit of time goes by, depending on how many other people are wanting to join and some other factors. It becomes pending, and then it becomes active. At this point, you should probably have a computer set up to do the work. So before all of this, maybe have a computer set up. But once the validator is active, it gets given some jobs. So the staker, unlike mining, so when you're mining, you're basically trying to find a target hash. When you're staking, the network's giving duties to the validator. And as long as it's doing those duties correctly, it gets rewarded. So that's great. You can be testing, and then two ways of exiting. One is just saying, well, I'm happy that my machine's validated for X amount of time, I want to withdraw. So you can exit, or you get kicked off the network for doing something destructive, and you get penalized some ETH. So most of the time, when validators are kicked off, if they're being kicked off independently, they only get, they get punished about 1 ETH. If they're part of a big group of validators get kicked off at the same time, which might look more like an attack, they might lose more ETH, but it's very hard to get slashed. That's the key message, I suppose. And then you exit. So there's sort of a validator life cycle, a bit more complex and proof of work. It's not designed to make your life easy. It's designed to make the security of the blockchain high, which is the key feature. Okay. So before I go any further, I'll just sort of talk about some Ethereum layers. So historically, we had ETH1, that was a proof of work chain, and then Beacon Chain came out in December 2020. That was called ETH2, and then it confused lots of people. People thought there were two Ethereums. Then they got renamed to Execution Layer and Consensus Layer. So these are basically two bits of software that you have to run on an Ethereum client. And then it became Ethereum, this Panda. So if you're running Ethereum on a node, you're basically running an execution layer and a consensus layer. Execution layer knows about the rules of the network, and then the consensus layer keeps consensus, makes sure that it's hard to change history, or basically economically infeasible. Okay, so you're running your validator, you get rewarded. There are a number of different types of reward. I won't talk about all of them. You can ask questions about some of them at the end if you want. The most common ones are attestations and block proposals, which come from the consensus layer, and then there are some that come from the execution layer. So it's key to point out that at the moment, you can only take advantage of the bottom two rewards, the execution layer, but as of next month, the 12th, I think, there's an Ethereum upgrade which sort of makes feature complete the life cycle of Validator, which is very exciting. So you'll be able to take advantage of all the rewards if you're a staker. Okay, so I've talked about Validator lifecycle, I've talked about the different layers. What does it kind of look like from an operator setup point of view? So there's a joyful staker on the left, that's the joy of staking Ethereum, and that person's deposited 32 ETH. Okay, they're running this computer on the right. It runs an execution client and a consensus client. There are different teams and companies implementing the Ethereum spec using different languages and different setups, which gives the network resilience. So you do have a choice of choosing a consensus client and execution client. And then you have the validator client. So the node operator has the withdrawal key. So they've got a secret that allows them to take advantage of the rewards. And then they've got a validator key, which is sat on their computer signing attestations, which is a very nice way of setting things up, because another type of staking is staking as a service. So this person still has the key where they can withdraw the funds, the rewards, the compensation from the network, but they've decided that they want to take the responsibility of, well, they want to own the key that gives them access to the rewards, but they're not quite sure that they can run the whole node and do upgrades and all of that shenanigans. So they give the validator key to someone else and say, I want you to do that job for me. I want you to make sure that the node, make sure that the validator does its job, and I'll just take the rewards and I'll pay you a small fee. So that's staking as a service, which is quite nice if you don't want to do all of the node operation. But what's more important is, what if you don't have 32 ETH? Most people don't have that, but they would still like to engage in staking in some way. Then pooled staking is a great way to engage with that. So there's a lot more going on in this slide. There's lots of different types of pool staking, but Rocket Pool is probably the most trustless, decentralized version, because it's basically interacting with a protocol that's sitting on top of the base Ethereum layer. So this person on the left is running a node. They don't have the full 32 ETH, they just have, they have 16 ETH, and they're looking for another 16 ETH so that they can run a validator. Now they could go and talk to their family and friends and sort of gather some ETH together, but that's kind of relies that there's trust assumptions, and you might fall out with your family and friends or whatnot. So it's great if you just get a protocol to do this part for you. So there's this group of people down here, they don't have 16 ETH, they might have 1 ETH each, and they still want to engage in a form of staking that promotes decentralization and all of those nice philosophies that are embedded with the Ethereum protocol. So they buy this token called RETH, which basically builds up this pool of ETH that then can be deposited on top of the 16 ETH that this person's deposited, the node operator. So they can operate their node, and then the rewards, the compensation that's paid out, is paid out. The person gets a 16 ETH, the rewards on that, and then these people get some rewards based on the amount they've paid, but also they pay a fee to the node operator. So the protocol handles all that. And there's some other keys as well, so there's like a node wallet, because the node has to interact with the what we call smart contract. But this is a really nice way of staking, if you want to do it in a trustless, decentralized way, but you don't have 32 ETH. So yeah, you could either engage with it as a node operator or as someone who buys Rocket Pool ETH. And there's some other things going on, but like the RPL staking that token, but that you can research that if you want to. Okay, so we've talked about the software, the validator lifecycle. What's the recommended hardware? What kind of machines do people use? So a modern CPU with at least 4 threads, at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, 2 terabytes of space, so running both execution layer and the consensus layer fills up between 1 and 2 terabytes of space now. When 4 terabytes of space gets cheaper, maybe it's wise to use that. And a home broadband connection, and like I said, it doesn't have to be up all the time, it can be up half the time, and you still come out net positive. So there are different clients that take up different amounts of RAM and space and stuff, so there's not some fixed definition. So most people err on the side of caution and get something, you know, like 32 gigs of RAM, maybe 2 terabytes space. Most of the time, CPU and RAM load is quite low, but if the network gets into a sticky state where it's not reaching what's called finality, more resources is required, which was seen in a lot of the early test nets, but it's not been seen on the current mainnet. Okay, so you've set up your node. It could be a Rocket Pool node, it could be solo staking. How do you monitor it? Rocket Pool comes with Grafana dashboards like this one. You can set them up as well for solo staking, and it just comes with all the data that you need. So you visit a web page and it comes with how much RAM you're using, what's the total CPU, how many attestations has the node attested successfully in proposals. You might get a proposal once every, depends how lucky you are, half a year or a few months or 5 years if you're very unlucky. So you can see validator activity up here. And then if you scroll down, you can see the state of the Rocket Pool network. So there's loads of information, more than you ever need, but it highlights in red things like this. It says you've got unclaimed RPL staking rewards, so you can come and claim that if you want. So it's very easy to see how it's all doing. And then a nice website, Beacon Chain or beaconchad.in, is a good website for viewing your validators. You can set up alerts on here. You can see other validators, you can see the state of the network, you can see how many validators are coming in. It just gives you a great view on the Ethereum network as a whole. Okay, so what are some best practices? Use a dedicated box, don't use your day-to-day Windows machine, that's bad. Generate your seed phrase on an air-gap machine, so when you're generating the initial private key, do it on an air-gap machine. Don't create a hot wallet. One point about Rocket Pool is initially you have to create a hot wallet to deposit the initial Ethereum stake, which is a bit scary, but there are ways around that. Secure your machine. You might not be familiar with Linux best practices, but there are plenty of guides out there specific for staking and general guides as well. Use minority clients. So when you're choosing a client, it's best to choose a client that not many people use, because if it gets a bug, it's better to use a client that fewer people are using, because if fewer people are using it, then less of the network is affected. If you're using a client that 70% of the network's using, and it gets a bug, then 70% of the network's affected, and you're punished proportionally to how much of the network is affected. But also, you don't want to use a client that only one person uses, so there's a bit of thinking involved there. Set up validator monitoring, I've covered that. You know, set up alerts to your phone, things like that. You keep up to date with client and OS updates. That's just good hygiene, and make sure someone else can access the funds. So everyone thinks about the technical aspects, but there's no point in staking. You know, it can be a lot of money. If something happens to you, it's nice if someone has access to that, but it's quite complicated to, you know, your friends and family might not care at all about Ethereum or staking or things like this. But it's nice to have some sort of mechanism in place in case something does happen, and it's worth saying that. And start a test network. Okay, so if you just want to try implementing or having a go with what I just talked about, you can do it on a test network just to learn. But if you want to jump in and go to the mainnet, go to the test network first. Because, yeah, you don't want to do something wrong. And I'll finish on another picture. This is, you can't see the bottom, but this is someone who basically travels around, and they've got a staking node in their camper van, and it's powered by the sun, and it's using Starlink, and this is sort of like, this illustrates the sort of decentralization that can be achieved instead of all the stakers being in centralized exchanges and things like that. Thank you very much. Thanks. And there's some resources as well, so those are some things that I think are worth taking note of if you're interested.